It's great to have you joining us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. I'm host Carrie Freeman coming to you in August of 2025 with special guest Danae Wolfe, an insect photographer and bug advocate who is going to convince you to love insects and want to save them instead of killing them, like she did with her popular TED Talk in 2018, From Ooh to Ah. Since insects need more allies, I was excited to discover her website, chasingbugs.com, where you can see cool close up photos of amazing looking insects and the light show of fireflies. And we'll make sure to talk about fireflies today because they're my favorites. Danae's got several books for kids, but also a new book for adults called Grass Isn't Greener. It's rooted in 20 practical steps that anyone can take in their own backyard or balcony or public green space to attract and support our insect friends, since they are unfortunately in decline globally. We'll talk about those practical steps today, from leaving leaves on the ground to selecting eco-friendly holiday decorations, from eliminating light pollution to attracting wildlife to devoting space to grow native plants. I'm going to add in stuff about how we talk about other animals and insects and the language we use. So these tips and photos are at chasingbugs.com, and Danae also links there to her short film by the same name, Chasing Bugs. Welcome, Danae.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, Carrie.
Now, I know a lot of photographers who do wildlife photography, but you don't hear of many photographers that specialize in the smallest and most diverse array of wildlife insects. What got you started down that path?
Yeah, I think my journey to macro insect photography is kind of interesting because I didn't start out as a bug lover. In fact, as a young girl, I hated all insects, all spiders, anything creepy, crawly. I was really quite afraid of, especially spiders in particular, like severe arachnophobia. Couldn't even look at photos of spiders. But around the age of 12, I picked up my first camera. And I was really attracted to photographing flowers. I don't know really what created that interest, but I loved getting really up close and personal to flowers. So that's where my journey really started. And then it wasn't until about my sophomore or junior year of college, I was working in digital photography at that time, and my parents got me my first macro lens for Christmas one year. And all of a sudden, I could get really up close and personal to the flowers that I loved photographing. And that's when I started to take notice of this array of different species visiting the flowers, the bees, the grasshoppers, the wasps, the things that always just thought were so scary and frightening. Now, at the same time, in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life when I started college, but we're kind of on this conveyor belt of you graduate high school, you go to college, and I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. And I took one class as a requirement. It was called Humans and the Environment, and it was about our human impact on the planet. And for the first time in my life, I was like, I know what I want to do. I want to be an environmental educator. I want to teach other people about their impact on the planet and what to do. So you kind of pair that newfound passion with, hey, I'm noticing a lot of bugs on all of these flowers. And
Yeah.
it was just like things clicked. And I fell in love with insects. I fell in love with communicating about how beautiful and diverse they are through the lens of photography. And it's
Yeah.
just really grown from there for the last 20 years.
Oh, where did you go to college? Because I'm very impressed that they required that you take a humans and environment class
Yeah, so I went
since
to
I
a very
teach at a
small,
college.
yeah, it was a very small private liberal arts school called Hiram College in Northeast Ohio, and it
Oh,
was
okay.
actually a distribution requirement. I needed a class that was cross-posted in two
Oh,
departments,
okay.
and this one was like environmental studies and sociology. And I was like, oh, if it fits the bill, I'll take it. Like,
Yeah.
oh, gotta do this. Like, no interest before that. And the professor that I had, her name was Professor Sarah Maybe, just completely changed my life and like trajectory of
That's
my career.
awesome. That just shows why environmental education in schools, is so important because it can put someone on a whole different path. And we need more people, working for the environment. In all this time when you've been photographing insects, are there certain insects like that are your favorite where you're just like, oh, I hope I see such and such today or something?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. Like, what's your favorite insect? And I have a couple different answers because it depends on how I'm looking at it. So I have the species that I love to photograph, but then I have the species that I love to sort of interact with.
Ah,
And on the side of like species that I love to photograph, things like jumping spiders. I know it's not an insect, it's a spider, it's an arachnid, but jumping spiders are so charismatic. They're so fun to find and sort of observe because they have this like innate curiosity about them. They sort of can
Hmm.
cock their head to the side as they're looking at you to kind of get a
Cute.
better view, which of course is reminiscent of like a cute little puppy dog.
Yeah.
But they're fun to photograph, but my
It's like a
favorite.
sports photographer at that point.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
really is. And you don't always get the shot because they're just
Right.
more often than not, they jump on my camera lens. So it's fun to photograph them. But my favorite insects are our membracids. There are tree hoppers, and the oak tree hopper in particular is my favorite because they're one of a few species that we know that display maternal care. So the mom actually she lays her eggs in the branch of an oak and then she stays with them throughout their entire like juvenile development, which is a fairly rare thing among
Yeah.
non-social insects. We see that in honeybees and bumblebees and ants, but in our non-social insects like tree hoppers, it's very, very abnormal for to just to have this incredible display of care and
Yeah.
like mothering and parental care. It's just really cool.
That's awesome. Well, when did you realize you needed to also become a bug advocate, like more explicitly, in addition to your photography that highlights their beauty and complexity?
Yeah, this is a great question too, because for a long time I would just go out and take photos of bugs and then I would come home and I would upload them to my computer and I would choose the best ones and post them on Facebook. And that was what I did. It was just bug photography. And at some point along the line, especially working in a career in conservation, I began to realize insects are in massive decline. Around 40% of insects are threatened with extinction today globally. Some pockets, it's a lot more severe than that in certain geographies and habitats, and in some places, it might not be that severe, but globally, 40% of insect species are in decline. Now,
Wow.
what's really stark about this is we have about a million described species of insects, a million species that are known to science. But entomologists think that we could have 5 or 10, maybe even 20 or 25 million species of insects in the world, which means we only know a fraction of them,
Right.
which is staggering.
Yes.
So we know that 40% of research species are in decline, but we
Mhm.
haven't even like analyzed all of those 1 million species, let alone the 5 or 10 or 20 or 25 million that could exist. So
Whoa.
it could be a lot starker than that. And I realized through photography, maybe I can help shape public opinion. A lot of people think of insects as nasty little things that the world would be much better off without. That's not
Mhm.
true at all.
Oh,
Like
no
we need
way.
insects. So I began to pair photography with more storytelling and advocacy and conservation minded practices. And from that, really evolved Chasing Bugs.
Yeah, and that's your website, Chasing Bugs, and then a film that came out about that.
Exactly. So Chasing Bugs is sort of my conservation education initiative to
Yeah.
help people understand why insects are so needed and what we can do to help protect them.
Yeah, I love that. And I wanted to discuss with you, I was just in the North Carolina Appalachia Mountains. So this is like south of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And I was staying in a creekside cabin, and I was just impressed by how many different types of insects there were. Like, actually, insects were the main animals I saw. You know, you keep thinking, well, I'm going to see deer and bear. I actually didn't see them. Um, so I saw like some birds and squirrels, but I assume that insect biodiversity means that area I was in doesn't contain that many toxins or has a more quality habitat, would you say?
That is likely
Yeah,
exactly what's happening when you see a lot of diversity of any species, whether it's bird or insects or
right.
whatever else. Yeah, that means that that habitat is probably very conducive to really providing what those insects or other species need. So that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Because a lot of people out there, there's too much property or something, so they're not really trying to make it look pristine or whatever, and they're letting things grow. And anyway, so and there's a creek and all these tall trees and undergrowth and things like that. Now, and I would see fireflies around 9 o'clock at night, and some would fly way up into the really tall tree canopy. What do fireflies need for a healthy habitat?
Yeah, I love this question so much because we are seeing a lot of research come out. In fact, all summer, this summer, we on social media, there was this thing parroted again and again that fireflies are in massive decline. We're the last generation to see fireflies, and people are
Oh
like, "Is this
no.
true? Is this really going to happen?" What people don't realize is when we see this firefly display in the summer, and if you're in sort of the eastern U.S., the Appalachian region is like a wonderful place to see fireflies. when we see this firefly display, the adults glowing and flashing, that is the result of 1 to 2 years of life in the undergrowth, life that happened to get those adult fireflies to that stage. So fireflies develop, eggs are laid usually in leaf litter or soil or rotting logs. They hatch, they live as larvae then for 1 to 2 years in that
Whoa.
habitat, the leaf litter, the logs. And those are the things that we tend to not have in a lot of our suburban environments.
Right.
We
Right,
remove the
right.
leaves, we get rid of the dead logs, and we plant grass everywhere, and then we mow it really short, right? So fireflies need those moist habitats, the leaf litter, healthy soils, pesticide-free soils, rotting logs. Of course, they live as larvae for 1 to 2 years, and they pupate, and they look like these little shrimp things. A lot of the species. The what's really cool about fireflies too is the larvae and the pupa actually glow of all
Mm.
species. Not all species glow as adults, but they all glow as larvae and as pupa, which is really neat. And then they emerge as adults, right, in this perfectly timed sort of symphony of light that comes out in the summer. And we have so many different cool species of fireflies too. I think about 270 species in the US or North
Oh,
America.
wow. Yeah.
You said you kind of saw them in the Appalachian come out around 9 p.m. We
Yeah, it
tend
was
to
kind of
hear.
late, but yeah, but it doesn't get, it doesn't get dark and they like it when it's
It
really
depends on
dark.
the species,
Oh,
right? So
okay. Yeah,
they're
it was
typically in like the dusk hours. We see, especially like here in the eastern US, our common firefly species is called the Big Dipper or the eastern
okay.
common firefly. They're the ones that kind of make these little swooping J shapes when they fly. They come out at dusk. So around
Okay.
8:30, 9 p.m., usually like early July-ish, they'll start to swoop. And then they'll fly for maybe an hour or so. And then when it gets really dark, we see those other species that tend to be in the tree canopy in
Oh,
the really
okay.
dark areas. Now, you were in the Appalachian region where they also have synchronous fireflies, which need like really healthy habitat, forested, and they start flashing really late at night, like 10:30 is when they really start to pick up. So there's different, like there's this perfectly
Wow. Yeah.
orchestrated like light show that happens with different species as the night goes on. But most of us don't live in habitats where we see that. We just see the common like Big Dippers.
Right. It didn't occur to me that it was multiple species either.
Yeah.
That's
And you
awesome.
can tell by their flash patterns too. Like the Big
Yeah.
Dippers make that J shape. The ones in the trees tend to just kind of pop off. And there it's like a very like rapid like twinkling of
Okay.
lights. So it's really cool.
Yeah. And also in Appalachia, I saw a lot of different types of spiders, like from big spiders to really small, and they're usually hanging out on their webs. And then, except for the daddy long legs, because they seem to just be walking around a lot. In fact, one was like walking across my t-shirt. Um, so, yeah, I think that we all are kind of fascinated by the webs of spiders, and like from a photography standpoint, that gives you a nice, like someone who's just sitting there waiting to be photographed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love photographing spiders. I used to be deathly afraid of them, but as time has gone on and I've gotten closer to them from behind the lens, I've realized these are really cool, and
Yeah.
their life and behavior and natural history is really cool. We have one little spider called the what is like the trash line orb weaver, and what they do is they kind of like pick out debris,
Mm.
and like even like the dead exoskeletons of the insects that they feed on, and they create this like trash line in their web. And it's meant to, I think, in some cases, I think it's meant to like showcase birds, like, hey, there's something here, don't fly into my web and ruin it, because they'll sit in their web for, I saw one in my window for several weeks. She lived
Wow.
there.
Yeah.
And they're so cool. The webs are amazing. Then you have these great big orb weavers that develop these like huge webs. We had a big orb weaver develop one on our front porch. I'm not even joking. From the purple coneflowers in my pollinator garden all the way across my front sidewalk up to the side of my house, this web must have been about 8 feet. Like just the
Whoa.
threads keeping it together
Yeah.
were probably like 7 or 8 feet in diameter. And then you had this great big web in the center and this orb weaver sitting in the center of that. It was so cool.
Yeah. The way they build things is really awesome. And then, of course, we're all attracted to butterflies. And so I just kind of saw more butterflies when I was in the mountains and also moths too, like
Yeah.
lots of flying moths and butterflies. And there was these black and blue butterflies. It's interesting because they also clustered a lot on the gravel road as if they were sucking something from the rocks. It was almost like I was scared I was going to hit them with my car. And I thought it was unusual just because there's so much greenery around. Like, why are they on the road? I don't know if you know why they're down
Yeah,
there.
I know exactly why they were. So we
Okay.
tend to think of butterflies as, these beautiful, flitting, fairy-like creatures that are attracted to flowers, right? So we see
Yeah.
them sucking nectar, and, visiting flowers. But these species actually need salts and minerals too that they can't get from the flowers that they visit, which is why we see this behavior known as puddling. So they'll tend to gravitate toward, it could be puddles in a driveway, for example, and they'll just kind of puddle around and sit on the rocks and basically sip like the minerals and salts off of stones. But we also tend to see this behavior, and again, butterflies are so beautiful and delicate, but we tend to see them gravitate toward like scat piles, so
Mhm.
feces. You may
Right.
have seen this even in your own suburban neighborhoods around things like dog poo. If
Yeah.
people are unfortunately leaving that in your neighborhood, you'll see butterflies gravitate towards that, and they're going for the salts. You can actually create a sort of a human made puddling station just with a shallow dish. Um, just sort of go and cultivate some like mud out of your garden. I
Hmm.
like to do like a sandier kind of mud substance, and I'll put this in a shallow dish, almost like you're making a mud pie. Keep it nice and moist, not over watered. You don't want standing
Yeah.
water in here. But then you can place that dish in if you have like a pollinator garden or a place where butterflies
Yeah.
tend to visit the flowers, and you're just giving them that resource, that little puddling station where they can get the minerals. The males in particular need that, which helps with get them like basically the nutrients that they need for reproduction.
Oh, that's so cool. And then also, when I was out on the deck by the creek and stuff, of course, there's lots of mosquitoes and gnats and different things. And so I would burn citronella candles, and they seem to actually work pretty well. Is that friendly to insects? Or like, what do you do when you go outside to prevent yourself from being bitten, or if you're sitting, outside at dusk?
Yeah, so citronella actually works to mask our human odor, which is
Okay.
why it has a very particular smell,
Like
right? So it's meant to
strong
just sort of
lemony kind of smell
yeah,
to
it's meant to
me.
tell mosquitoes and other like biting insects like, hey, there's no human here. It's just this smell that you smell. But citronella only goes so far because if there's the slightest wind or breeze, it's just going to blow that scent away, and the mosquitoes are going to scent that you're there. They're going to sense that you're there. So what's a better solution? I mean, yes, you can wear things like, your DEET or your insect repellent. I hate having that stuff on my skin.
Right.
Um, if you're at like a backyard barbecue or you're sitting in one spot and you just want to try to keep those biting flies away from you, spatial repellents tend to work best. And a spatial repellent is basically a fancy word of saying like get a fan,
A
something
fan.
that can
Okay.
like blow air because
Yeah.
those flies, like as
I-
little as they are, they can't fly through that basically blast of air. So
yeah.
spatial repellents work really well. A lot of people want to put the what are they called? The zappers, the bug zappers.
Yeah, I don't
They
like
think
that.
that that'll keep stuff away because it'll attract insects. Bug zappers are indiscriminate killers, and research has
Yeah.
shown that they kill way more beneficial
Yeah,
insects.
you don't want to be killing anybody. You're
Right,
just
just
trying
like,
to
hey,
keep
stay
them
away from
off of
me.
you, but you don't need to so repellent is the word and not like,
So
killing.
yep, so repellents tend to work best. You can also get like, they make I think those like kind of citronella infused bracelets. I've worn
Oh,
those before because again, you're just trying to mask your human smell and that's
yeah.
kind of staying with you and creating this, I guess, cloud of like, hey, get away from me for the
Yeah.
bug. So those have worked for me in the past too.
Yeah. And let me ask you something I've been thinking about lately since I study communication. And as an animal advocate, I've recently tried to avoid calling insects bugs because I was realizing the word bug as a verb is negative, like you bug me, you annoy me, as if that's all insects do is bug us. So I try to say insect rather than calling them bugs, like I choose to try to say firefly now instead of lightning bugs. What do you think of that language we use to refer to all kinds of insects? Or have you thought about that term with bugs? I mean, maybe I'm over analyzing it there, which wouldn't be the first time.
I don't think that you're overanalyzing it. I think a lot of people will try to make you believe that you're overanalyzing it, but I don't think that you are at all. And this is a really interesting question because I've named my entire initiative Chasing Bugs.
Right.
And even this question makes me think, should I change the name? I've actually had people say, well, bugs are true bugs, and you're talking about things that aren't just true bugs from an entomology standpoint. So maybe you should call it chasing insects and spiders and other arthropods, which doesn't
Great
have
website name.
quite the same ring
Yeah.
to it. But I also like I love the name that I've chosen, chasing bugs, because most people are running from bugs and I'm chasing them. So it's this idea that
Ah,
like I want to be near them. But you're exactly right. Language shapes our perception. It shapes then our attitude and it can shape our actions. So when we see something as a pest or a
yeah.
bug, it shapes our entire viewpoint and behavior around these creatures. So language matters so much. And I see this a lot in invasive species narratives. In fact, I
Yes.
recently talked about this on my Facebook page, and people like just blasted me apart. It was such a heated conversation, which I didn't think was going to happen, but I was basically calling into question when we talk about invasive species, we tend to use a lot of warlike
Yes.
language, militaristic language, kill it, stomp it out, dead on sight,
Eradicate.
eradicate, right? And that, especially when we pair that language with species that come from certain geographies or countries, when we start to say Chinese privet or
Hmm.
Japanese barberry or these things, then it starts to shape more than just our.
Sounds kind of racist.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And when I pointed this out, people were like, "No, invasive species need to be taken care of." And I was like, "Yes, from an ecological standpoint, like I've worked in conservation my entire career. I have 2 degrees in this. Like I spent 20 years working in conservation. Invasive species do need to be addressed and managed. When we communicate about it, though, we don't have to over militarize the language that we use because it starts to bleed over into our perception of other things. And
Yes.
so you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Language shapes perception, which shapes behavior. And this is something that I am becoming more and more, I'm leaning into that discomfort to
Yeah.
try to help people understand that. We can lead with compassion. We can speak with compassion, even with species that do need to be managed. Even the language that I use to talk about landscape management,
Yeah.
in the green industry, the horticulture industry, we use landscape management. I say stewardship because I'm
Yes.
inviting people
Nice.
to be stewards of the land. Sometimes that means, yes, bringing the native species back and removing those species that are causing ecological damage, like those that are known to be invasive. But yes, you're exactly right. Language matters so much, and we could have an entire like day-long conversation about this.
Oh, yeah. Right. And I try to use the term introduced species rather than saying native, just to remind us probably that we're probably the reason they're
We
there.
did
And so
it.
it's not like that they're out like criminals trying to kill us or ruin everything. It's like we have a responsibility here.
We
And
do
it's
place
I'm
a lot of
glad,
blame.
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the word pest too, because I definitely try to avoid that. I try to even avoid saying pesticides and different things. But like, what about all the deadly and violent advertising there is for quote unquote pest control products designed to kill bugs dead? Like when you go to the home improvement store, if you pass the pest control section, they're like gloating about your ability to eradicate them from your home and yard. Like you need to protect your family supposedly by mass killing through poisoning or zapping individuals to death. And there's no possibility of coexistence or non-lethal solutions. Like, I mean, just the language that we allow in the commercials, like you mentioned, it's militaristic and yeah, it's just deadly and lethal. And I mean, I, I just,
Yeah,
I
and
feel like
somehow
it's the
we're okay with
wrong
it.
way to frame all this.
Exactly. We somehow, I think, we are okay with it because it's just a bug. It's just an insect. And what I've invited people to consider is, what if we weren't talking about bugs? What if we
Yeah.
weren't talking about insects or spiders? What if we were talking about birds
Yeah.
or reptiles or amphibians or mammals, right? The conversation would be so different because it's just a bug. It's like I've heard this narrative too, like parroted again and again of, well, insects don't feel pain and they're not
Mhm.
sentient. So it doesn't matter. Like killing them is not immoral or inhumane. And I'm like, do you like the science now is starting to catch up. We're starting to realize that like insects are a lot smarter than we think just because they don't have the same sort of nervous system that we do and they might not feel pain in the same way. I mean, we know that plants communicate to each other. Like to
Right.
say that insects, we can just kill them because they don't matter and they can't feel pain in the way that we do, it's a very superficial narrative. And I think is incredibly problematic and something that we need to explore more and more because the more research we do, the more we uncover like, ooh, yeah, these creatures are a lot more complex than we've I think let ourselves believe.
Yeah. And we tend to also, the smaller a creature is, the less significant they are to us.
Like,
And so, like, we love whales or bears, although, I mean, I know some people are scared of them, but like, we pay more attention to them or we give them more credit. But the smaller an animal is, the more we just assume they don't matter. But that's just a matter of perspective, you
it
know?
is, and this is why I
And so
love macro
your
photography.
photography kind of makes
It
them
like
big to us.
exactly. So people are like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea. Like a jumping spider was so cute. I'm never gonna look at one the same way. It's not this
Yeah.
big hairy creature that's like scurrying across my wall. That's like a cute fuzzy little teddy bear that just happens to have 8 legs." So
Yeah.
that's why I love photography, is you can illuminate this whole new side of creatures that most people have never taken, more than 2 seconds to really explore.
Yeah. And I know on your Chasing Bugs website, you talk about how passing on pesticides is an important part of supporting a healthy, diverse population of insects and other wild animals, and it also reduces our risk of diseases for human animals too. Tell us about what alternatives we have to using insect-killing chemicals to maintain like a good-looking yard or green space.
Yeah, well, nature is the best solution. There is balance in nature inherently. We have certain like carrying capacity, for example, of creatures, usually dictated by the resources of the land, and then predator-prey relationships. While we humans in a lot of suburban and urban landscapes, and even like agricultural landscapes, we've disrupted that balance of predator-prey relationships, which is where we start to get what we as humans consider to be pests, things that are either existing in excess, right? There's too many of them and we need to get rid of them, or they're the creatures that are eating the plants that we want to grow for a certain aesthetic in our garden. We don't want, beetles or caterpillars or whatever eating our plants because we want them to be like a botanical statue. And when
Mhm.
insects are eating them, all of a sudden, like the prized roses in our garden no longer look like that botanical statue. It's tarnished. So I think the best pest control. And again, I hate that word too because
Yeah,
pest is a very human driven
right.
narrative. Like in nature, it's just nature. The best thing that we can do is create ecological balance. We can create habitats and ecosystems that have a healthy predator prey relationship so that nothing gets out of check. The problem is everything's out of balance right
Mhm.
now because of how we are stewarding the land. We've brought in a lot of non-native plants from other parts of the
Yes.
world that don't have natural like predators. And those plants then become what we consider invasive and they're growing and taking over habitats. Same with some insects, right? Because we've disrupted that balance, we see it most notably, I think, here in the eastern US with white-tailed deer. We've gotten rid of
Mhm.
some of their primary predators like wolves, and now they're growing out of control and creating ecological sort of issues in a lot of our what would have been pristine like forest. Now the deer are over browsing and it's just creating all sorts of issues. It's the same in the world of insects. So the best thing that we can do is bring the native plants back, create this beautiful, healthy predator prey balance. And nature kind of tends to take care of itself from there.
If you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature. I'm host Carrie Freeman talking with Danae Wolfe, insect photographer, conservation educator, and author of the book Grass Isn't Greener. Her website with lovely photography and lots of insect-friendly garden tips is chasingbugs.com. And she has a short film by that name, Chasing Bugs. So, Danae, let's talk through some more of the solutions you propose in your book, Grass Isn't Greener. Actions that we can feel good about to have a healthy, wildlife-friendly yard or garden or private land or public green space, and to stop the decline of so many insect species. So let's start with what you call lessen your lawn. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I think step one, if you're thinking about really fostering biodiversity and a more climate resilient yard as well in a suburban or urban landscape or wherever you live, it's really about kind of thinking getting rid of your turf grass. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that because like turf grass represents it sort of has become almost this marker of like superiority and like I've made it. It's the American dream, right? With your little house, the picket fence, and like the great big
Like
like
that's where the kids are supposed to
yes,
play in your
exactly.
turf
Like that
yard. Yeah.
freshly manicured, like low, low weed-free, pest-free, like turf grass. But there are so many inputs that we have to put into managing for turf grass. And we're getting rid of our leaves so that it doesn't suffocate the grass. We are, over fertilizing so the grass stays green. We are applying pesticides so that things don't eat the grass. Like everything is about maintaining this monoculture that
Mhm.
isn't providing food or habitat or resources for a lot of other creatures. And we're often poisoning the soil to keep that grass, growing in its most pristine form. And we don't have a lot of healthy soil ecosystems, which are kind of the foundation of a healthy habitat. So lessening the lawn, yes, can be about quite literally getting rid of turf grass and replacing it with native plants, but it's also about this idea of just letting go of control a little bit. Like this is not a
Mhm.
natural habitat. So if you want to foster wildlife habitat and biodiversity, we need to get over our love relationship with turf grass.
Yeah, and a lot of times things we want things to be so manicured would be another way and controlled. And maybe it is a sign. There's all kinds of psychological, I'm glad you mentioned that aspects to why people want that. But I remember back when I lived out in Eugene, Oregon, it was more common there. And there's some of this here in Inman Park, Atlanta, where I live too, where people would use their front yard as like permaculture or something. Like they would grow food in their front yard. I'm like, yeah, that's a better use of your yard. Or they would just have a lot of wildflowers, and the yards were really small in their little cottage houses and stuff. And I'm like, I thought that was amazing. And then, yeah, you're going to see more bees and different things. So, also, I think your neighbors and the whole community has to kind of support that idea so they don't see your yard with your Audubon certified habitat, as like being unruly and unkempt, right? Like, no, it's natural. But you can still find ways to have it be beautiful or, maybe just have a small patch where you could sit out with your chair, but then add a lot more to it. And I know there's even something called No Mow May. And I remember seeing a sign for that somewhere when I was driving around. What is that? So that must be like in the spring.
No Mow May was a movement that came over to the US. I want to say in like the late 20 teens, maybe, and it came from the UK. And it was this idea that in usually the month of May, when the rain is falling and our grass begins to grow, the temperatures are starting to warm up, you should forego mowing your lawn for the entire month to allow floral resources to blossom and give nectar and pollen resources to those early emerging species like bees in particular. And No Mow May has brought a lot of criticism in recent years because people are saying they're basically questioning like what do we tend to see in our lawns in the month of May if we just let our lawns grow? Like what are the floral resources that come up? Oftentimes it's those non-native species like clover or dandelions, which if you live in a neighborhood like mine and people are very meticulous about their manicured lawns, people don't want to see dandelions or clover. But there's also been this narrative touted, especially on social media, saying that dandelions are the most important food source for early emerging bees. And now we're seeing people say, no, no, it's not. Native plants are the most important food source for any bees and other wildlife. Um, I don't like to go all in on one thing or another. No Mow May, I think, can be a really good entry point for people who are like, I don't know what to do or where to start, and this all feels very overwhelming. You don't even have to completely forego mowing in the month of May. Maybe just mow a little bit less frequently and let the dandelions and clover and wild violets blossom in your yard to give bees something. What I like to tell people is while dandelions might not be like the best food source for bees, if they are the only food source in what is otherwise a barren desert of floral resources, those dandelions are at least a lifeline. It's like fast food.
Right.
If your option is starvation or fast food, what are you going to choose? Fast food. But obviously, the best thing would be a buffet of healthy produce, right? By way of native flowering plants. Most of our suburban and urban neighborhoods, though, don't have that buffet of native flowering plants, which is why when you get to that point where you have the resources and the time and the knowledge, begin to systematically remove the turf grass and replace it with plants that are native to your region.
Yeah, that was the next thing I was gonna bring up is what's your recommendation for like changing over to native plants? Because usually I think people go to the big box stores and then like they see whatever's really pretty, or there's the begonias or whatever, the pansies, and so they're on sale and I'll buy them and I'll put them out. And that's kind of what most people do. We go by what's pretty. But is there another like source we should be going to, or should we be trying to change the attitudes of these big home improvement or garden stores so that they're offering people other things rather than just asking some of us who are responsible to go out of our way to try to find native plants? I don't know if there's a movement, to have native plants at our stores.
It's a yes and
Yeah.
situation, in my opinion. We should absolutely be putting pressure on these big box retailers to source and provide really healthy native plants. And these are plants that are native to your ecoregion, not just native to North America or native to the US, but what's native to where I live in Ohio might not be native to somebody who lives in California. So we really
Yeah.
want to be sourcing plants that are native to the region. Again, the problem is though, many people want those showy plants. They want the plants that are labeled pest free or
Mhm.
pest resistant or
Yeah.
fast growing or all characteristics that set a plant up to be problematic and to be a botanical statue, like I referenced earlier, to not play nicely, to not be a part of the ecosystem. The reality is, wildlife and insects developed over millennia relationships, oftentimes specialized relationships with the plants that they feed on or need for habitat. Like the most, I think, notable example is monarch butterflies needing to lay their eggs on milkweed because that is what the caterpillars have evolved to eat. Without milkweed, monarchs cannot reproduce. But a lot of bees and other butterflies have these sort of specialized relationships with native plants. So we need to be putting those back. Thankfully, there are a growing number of local nurseries. I mean, where I live in Ohio, we've had, native plant nurseries pop up all over the place because there
Great.
is a growing demand, which is great. But what about for the uninitiated? What about those people who aren't quite there yet? They're not paying close enough attention, so they do go to their big box retailer and they're finding these beautiful plants. This is where it becomes a yes and. We need to be putting pressure on those retailers to get rid of, especially those plants that are known to be problematic in our landscapes, no matter how gorgeous and how great they sell. We need to be getting rid of those and we need to be bringing more native species back.
And can you briefly tell us about another one of your recommendations in Grass Isn't Greener, your book? You say leave the leaves. And so before autumn comes, can you tell us why we shouldn't be bothering to leaf blow and rake our yards and public green spaces so vigorously?
Leaves are habitat. I have a whole chapter called Leave the Leaves in my book, Grass Isn't Greener, because leaves are habitat, and yet we have vilified them in suburban neighborhoods
Yeah.
everywhere. My entire street is lined with great big mature oak trees, and
Oh.
my neighbors, it's awesome, right? Like
Yeah, it's
oak trees
beautiful.
are
Yeah.
phenomenal. It's my favorite part about where I live. But my neighbors, oh my gosh, it is nothing but a symphony of leaf blowers and lawnmowers
Oh,
from
God.
really
Symphony.
all summer into, late fall because everybody's like, get rid of the leaves. We don't want them to suffocate the grass. We talked earlier about fireflies,
Yes.
laying their eggs and living as larvae in leaf litter for 1 to 2 years. It's not just fireflies, it's moths, it's a lot of butterflies, there's a whole beautiful ecosystem. It's all sorts of arthropods that help keep our soils healthy. It's a lot of people are like, we don't want moths in our yard because moths are icky. Moths are beautiful,
Yeah.
way more biodiverse than butterflies. And a lot of these moths will pupate and overwinter in that leaf litter. And caterpillars are needed if you like birds or
Yeah.
reptiles or amphibians, because especially baby birds, that's what they eat. That's what mommy and daddy bird feed their babies. So if you want birds, you need caterpillars. And if you want caterpillars, you need that healthy canopy of tree coverage that they eat. And then the healthy soil and leaf litter ecosystem beneath that tree because that's where they're going to after they become, they eat and eat and eat as caterpillars, and then they come down to pupate in that layer of leaf litter. And when those leaves aren't there, the caterpillars cannot complete their life cycle, which means no more caterpillars and no more birds. So it's this
Right. It's all
whole
connected too.
all
Right.
connected. So leaves, I mean, leaves are wonderful. They create a moisture barrier and as they decompose, they pull carbon back into the soil. They create a really healthy soil structure as well. So if you have like heavy clay soils, leaving your leaves and beginning to integrate those decomposing leaves into that can help just like replenish and create a very healthy soil substrate that allows water and air to permeate, which is really important for things like healthy plant root structure and growth. So again, it's all connected.
Okay, and we've been talking about the noise pollution too of these leaf blowers, which is like my nemesis or something. But there's also light pollution, and one of your recommendations for wildlife-friendly green spaces that I got off your chasingbugs.com website is called Flip the Switch, about how our outdoor lighting could be harmful to insects and wildlife. Could you briefly tell us why and like how we could simply redirect our lighting to be less disruptive?
Yeah, so I mentioned that leaves are habitat. Darkness is also habitat. A lot of species, particularly fireflies, which I have never met somebody who doesn't love fireflies, they need darkness to complete their life cycle, right? Especially our flashing fireflies that need that darkness to flash and find a mate. Unfortunately, a lot of our neighborhoods are light polluted. I think the statistic was 99% of people in the US live under light polluted skies. And the
Oh,
solution is as easy as either shutting any unnecessary lights off at night or shielding them. If you do have to have a light, making sure that it is properly shielded so the light is basically directed to where it's supposed to be directed to. That is the ground for
okay.
safety reasons, as opposed to just going off into the atmosphere. If you are in a home, this is easy to do, but if you work in like an office building that tends to keep their lights on all night,
Mm,
advocate for seeing how you can shut those off, not only to reduce light pollution, but also energy, which is
yes,
going to help
right.
with our, climate crisis.
And to keep birds from flying into windows and stuff at
Yes.
night too for the migration. There's so many reasons we need to change our lighting and maybe even just have that motion detected so it's not
Motion
on
detection, yeah, that's another
most of the
great thing.
time and then only when you need it and then it goes back off again or
Exactly.
something.
Motion
Yeah.
detection is great. I have a neighbor who keeps their just this big garish security light on 24/7. I've never seen this light go off. And I always wonder why. Like, wouldn't it be easy just to put it on a motion sensor so it goes
Yeah.
on when you need it, but then it shuts off when you don't? That's another good point.
Well, to wrap up, what other tips or resources do you have for folks who are interested in being more attentive to or supportive of the insect world that sustains planetary life? Now, I'm going to interject and also say there's also like wildlife friendly holiday decoration tips is one thing in your book that I didn't get to because we're approaching Halloween and the holiday season. Um, so I didn't know what resources there were for people to figure out, also in their yard, even when they're decorating, how to think about insects.
There are so many things to think about, and it can feel overwhelming for people. I think the first tip that I would recommend is start small and don't let yourself get overwhelmed because I think that overwhelm can often lead to sort of paralysis and
Yes.
inaction. So start with one thing. If it's you thinking about your Halloween decorations this year, start there. Why are decorations so important? Because a lot of the things that we put out for any holiday can be death traps for insects and the
Mhm.
wildlife in ways that we don't often consider, right? Because we're thinking through our human lens. If you go to the store every year and you buy that polyester spiderweb material and you string it through your shrubs
Mm.
and trees as a spooky holiday decoration, think about the impact to wildlife that could get caught up or entangled in that, and meet their demise because you wanted a little spooky thing. Meanwhile, you're probably out there with a broom removing all of the real spider
Yeah,
webs.
exactly. That's so ironic too. It's like, why don't we just cultivate actual spider webs? People will be like,
Exactly.
that's disgusting. But
Right,
then at
exactly.
Halloween, it's like, where's your big, huge spider? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So just be more mindful about the actions that you take. Even, when you're putting these like non-native plant species in your yard that need to be over fertilized and over watered and just think about ask yourself like is this the right thing? Am I expending too much water? Am I using a chemical that's not needed here? What can I do differently? But like I said, more than anything, start small because this can feel overwhelming. And when we're dealing with a climate crisis and a
Mm.
biodiversity crisis. And a lot of people, I think, are in a place of inaction because they think, well, the government needs to be acting, corporations need to be acting. Yes, 100%. I like that needs to happen. That doesn't, though, exclude us as individuals from playing our part, whether it's voting with your dollar and not shopping at certain places for certain products, whether it's voting with your actual vote for legislators who are going to enact policy and legislation in support of our climate and biodiversity crises, or whether it's just planting a few pollinator plants in your yard as
Yeah.
your first step toward a healthier planet. It all matters. It all makes a difference.
Yeah, I like the idea even just of saying to yourself, like, why don't I create a non-toxic environment for me and my family and the neighborhoods, and, like for every living being.
It's
And
so
then,
important because we
yeah, and
excuse
if you
ourselves from
did
that, but
just
it's good for us
that, like
too.
no chemicals, and then what would be the best way to have a yard without chemicals and like low maintenance without using much water and resources, just make it easier on yourself. The native plants and everything can be the answer to that. And not having a lawn might save you time, and not raking your leaves saves you time. So all of these things could actually be good for your overall health and well-being while we're helping all our neighbors, because
Yes.
there's just an epidemic of all kinds of neurological diseases and stuff that everyone's getting. And it's just like, it's because every time we turn around, there's just chemicals everywhere because we want things to look a certain way.
Right.
And so I'm so glad you've helped explain to us alternatives to that that can be beautiful, and why that helps kind of all species.
Yeah, it all makes a difference, and you're exactly right. What I like to tell people is when we create a healthier planet for wildlife and insects and other things, we're creating a healthier planet for ourselves and our children and future
Absolutely.
generations. We're part of nature.
Yeah.
Every much as, a jumping spider or a tree hopper or a bird, we are part of nature too, and we need a healthy planet to thrive.
Yeah. Well, that's the end of our show, but I want to thank you, Danae Wolfe, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. Thanks for championing insects, some of the most maligned, misunderstood, and underappreciated members of our animal kingdom, to help us become their protectors and admirers. I hope you continue to inspire a lot of people and organizations to stop killing insects and to start supporting them.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
It was. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to In Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org, and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. I record from Atlanta in the foothills of the Appalachia Mountains in the Muskogee Creek territory and former range of the red wolf and perpetual range of mosquitoes. You can access action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, wrfg.org/intune to nature. The views and opinions expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia. And remember to take care of yourself and others, including other species like fireflies and other insects. Thank you for listening. Cheers.